I'm going to call this meeting to order. And first order of business is that I want to introduce our illustrious chairman, Dean Colson, that he's a guy that we all look up to, and he's not bashful to give us all the work that he can send our way, and we gladly accept whatever he assigned to us. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm turning it to you for our opening remarks.
Thank you, Maury. I'm only going to take a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to leave. I'm going to go rent a car and drive to Gainesville to go to a meeting at the University of Florida. So it's a very glamorous job being chair of the Board of Governors. Normally, when I talk to new trustees at a new trustees orientation for an existing university, I try to explain to them that their job is not to hire football coaches, not to hire defensive coordinators and offensive coordinators, and not to worry about who's the next basketball coach. You all don't get that speech because you all don't have a football team. And a lot of the perks of being a trustee of a university you all aren't going to have for a while. And so the job you've undertaken is a hard one, and in many ways a thankless one, but is an extraordinarily important one for this state and for Central Florida, but not just Central Florida, for the whole state. And frankly, I flew in last night just to spend 10 minutes here to thank you all for doing it. This new board is as fine a board as we have at any of our state universities. I could not be more proud of the quality of the people on this board and your willingness to undertake this responsibility, which is a huge responsibility. We have to shepherd the creation of a new university, and you've got a blank canvas to do it on. And so, be wise, be careful. Normally I tell people your only job is to hire and fire a president and raise money. Well, you got that problem, but you've also got to decide what kind of president you want, because what kind of university you're going to have, and you got to define that. So you all have a lot of difficult decisions to make, but I can't imagine a finer group of Floridians to undertake that. So I just came here. I'm going to leave in a couple minutes just to say thank you, and how much I appreciate your all willingness to do this. It's a wonderful thing you're doing for the state of Florida. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership. Really appreciate it. And I was just looking down at to see what hat I'm wearing right now. I'm wearing the chair of Trustee Nominating Committee that we have at the Board of Governors. And our job is at the Trustee Nominating is to select, the governors select half of the board members, we select half of the board members. On both sides, they all go through the Senate process and get confirmation. On the way here, I was thinking about why am I serving? I have been on different boards of nonprofits, state level for the last 20 years. And at the end of the day, it all comes back to give back. To give back to your community, to give back to your state, and to give back to your country. And that has played a big role for me to drive, to fly, and give a lot of my time for our state. And our state deserves it, because others behind us made it able for me to be here today. I was at a radio show one time, and somebody asked a question, and I said, if you're looking for glamour, don't apply. If you're really looking to something that you can put behind your name, you are not to apply. But if you really believe in giving back, you ought to apply. What you do is by far more important than giving your money or anybody's money. It's your time. That's the most valuable thing that you have in life. It's your time. So between the governor's office and the governor himself and our board, we are so committed to see you guys successful. There are so many people are for the Polytech, there are many people against it, but there was a law passed. And once the law passed, we all need to get behind it, and we all need to do all we can to see it successful. Your opportunity today and forever to come is you are the first board members of the Polytech, and forever will stay. You will be known as who made this university successful, or who that did not go far. My recommendation to you is that work outside the box. It doesn't mean because it's been done in the last 50 years, going forward that's the way it should be. It doesn't mean that you have to just look at status quo. Make a difference. Make a change. Be one of the one. Be the one that everybody in the country would look up to and say, wow. Because you start from clean sheet of paper. Very rare that happens. In any university, usually it starts from a college, there's a students there, you don't have one students. You don't have one staff. You don't have one professor. You're going to be the one making all those decisions. You could bring your first staff members, first professor, and first students. And at the end of the day, it's all about our children, the future of our country. It's all about them, to make sure that we educate them. We have a shortage of STEM in this country. It's all over the place. Jobs are going outside the country because they cannot fill it in this country, and we're losing it. It's a travesty, and you guys can make it different. You can give us engineers, scientists, and you can start it all from beginning, and you can begin with great ideas, but make sure your ideas is looked at, is just not something throw out and get it started and let's see what would happen. It all needs to be tested. You all need to really look at it step by step, and any ideas ought to be welcomed and need to be looked at. So at the Board of Governors, one of the things that we managed to do is, and with our chairman, previous chairman, we are independent. Each one of us are very independent. During the day, we fight over our opinion or what we think, but we always respect each other, because one thing is in common. One thing that I know the rest of my board members in the long run have the same view, and that is we want to do this for our children. Norm and I, sometimes we differ. Our votes are different. We fight over an issue, but at the end of the day, when we leave this room, we are friends. Because we all are after the same cause. So I encourage you to become friends, trust each other, work with each other, and let us be so proud to see our 12th university is an unbelievable success. I can imagine a day will come that our chairman and myself and others will sit under oak trees because we no longer can play golf and say, wow, do you remember the day we started the new 12th university? Look how far it has come, and you will do the same thing. Our governor is very, very involved with this process. He wants it. He wants to have this institution to be successful. He believes in STEM. He believes in job creation. And that's an opportunity for you, because you don't have to come from behind and try to convince him, because that's where your money comes from. He's the man that signed the bill. He believes on the cause. He believes in trying to get our children jobs. At the end of the day, he wants those kids that go to school and the parents get a second job and a third job and take money out of their saving for their kids to go to college. And the state that gives the money to the institution from the taxpayers, and the kids themselves that go out and borrow money to go to school. He believes that when they graduate, our governor wants those kids to have a job. He does not want to fool our kids. He does not want to fool those students that after 4 years or 6 years, and it says, oops, I can't get a job. Or I can't get a job to be able to pay my loan back. I can't get a job to be able to have a normal living. We want to create a university that when your students, the Polytechnic, when they graduate, they will say, I already have a job. Now, that will be the proudest moment for you guys, to say, we created a job for our state, we created a job for our children, and our taxpayers got return on their investment. That's the proudest moment. So, with that said, what I like to do is that to start introducing ourselves to each other and get to know each other. So I will probably start from, let's see, do you start from, okay, I tell you what, I start from Scott. Scott, can you in a couple of minutes tell us about your past and what you've done, your education, and what do you do now, and so forth?
Sure. Yeah, I've got no experience in the education business as it is today. I graduated from Northwestern University in '88 with a biomedical engineering degree. Started my first company in Illinois, which was a company called MasterChart, which was a healthcare information technology company. Grew that, sold it in 2000, and then I was brought down to run a company called CyberGuard, which was a information security company in 2001, which was in Fort Lauderdale. troubled company, public company, delisted from the NASDAQ. Spent 3 years turning that around, sold that in 2004, and now I'm running a company called Prolexic, that's in Hollywood. So I've got a good deal of sort of, private company experience. Ran one public company, but like I said, I've got no education experience, but I do have some ideas because we do recruit from universities, and I know what I'm looking for in universities, and hopefully I bring that kind of perspective to this group. We started 45 companies at Prolexic, 45 employees, and we've created 70 jobs now in a year, a little over a year. Average salary about $105,000 a year. So it's a very high-tech, high IQ point group that we're building. And I think, going forward, that the success of, quote unquote, the state, because that's our goal, is to attract as many high IQ individuals as we can to the state, in the sort of the engineering disciplines, and then keep as many high IQ points as possible in the state. And I think, I've got some very naive ideas as to how that potentially can be accomplished. But I definitely, at least from my perspective, and this probably isn't the form or the point to say it, but I want to try something new. I don't want to be part of a mill, where we're trying to get 5,000, trying to get 10,000, trying to get 15,000, where it becomes a numbers game. I really want it to be, measured by, the IQ points and the types of people we attract to this state, because I think that is in the best interest of Florida, and those types of individuals will then attract companies. It's one thing to bring companies down here with tax benefits and the like, but if the talent pool isn't here, they're not going to come. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, Scott. Don?
I'm a fifth generation of my family to live in Polk County. In fact, I live within sight of where two sets of my great-great-grandparents settled. I think people in town think that we just weren't clever enough to travel far. I'm an attorney. I went to Stetson University undergraduate and the University of Florida for law school. We're in a 10-man law firm that my grandfather was one of the founding partners of in 1900. Our firm has represented the Polk County School Board since 1939, and I currently do all the employment and real estate work for the school board. We began representing Polk Junior College when it was founded in 1963 as part of the school board. It was an operation of the school board originally, and I became general counsel for what is now Polk State College about 25 years ago. I've sat through a lot of Board of Trustees meetings, but never one that quite had the challenges that this group has. I'm excited about it. I agree with Maury that we have a wonderful opportunity, and I certainly look forward to seeing what's going to come out of this.
Thank you, Don. Mark?
Lived in Florida, lifelong Floridian, and I guess a fourth generation Floridian. We're in the trucking business. President of Comcar Industries. Went to Tulane for my undergraduate degree and also for my MBA. Very excited. I've been involved in the startup of a private school that's very proud about, that we're up to 600 kids there and going to a lot of great schools, getting a lot of great scholarship dollars. And Maury, I agree, the founding thing there is it's about the kids, and don't let the adults get in the way and mess it up. but it's about the kids. So education is very important. I'm very excited about this. The potential is huge for the state of Florida and really for our country. So very excited to be involved.
Thank you. Sandra?
I am thrilled to be here. I created a semi-new university by merging two very small universities, one of which was moving forward slowly and the other was dying, and I think we built a pretty successful place that's parading forward. I'm the president emeritus of the University of New England. I was the chief academic officer, vice chancellor of the University of Minnesota at Duluth, and faculty president and later assistant to the president of Temple University. I have my PhD, in fact, all my degrees from the University of Pennsylvania. So I'm a lifelong academic. My husband is a successful entrepreneur, and so I do have business experience. I stayed up one night last week worrying about how in the world we were going to get accredited in 18 months, thinking about the blank slate and what that means, about how fast we have to find leadership and how fast we have to agree on what it is we're going to set forth here. I also want to do something new and exciting. I felt that I could help with that accreditation because I've been a commissioner of accreditation for the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, and I presently am the vice chair of a group that does specialized medical school accrediting. So I'm looking forward, and I'm very excited to be working with such a stellar group of people.
Thank you, Sandra. Dick?
Good morning. I'm Dick Halligan, newbie as many are here in the room. My background is in science and technology, the evolution of science and technology. I started out in the museum world with the Smithsonian Institution. I was a curator of science and technology at the Air and Space Museum. And then I got heavily involved with the Air Force. I thought I'd go off for just a couple of years with them in the flight test business, wound up spending the next 28 years with the Air Force in a variety of capacities. And in the course of that, ran a succession of staff offices, wound up in the Directorate for Security, Counterintelligence, and Special Programs after 9/11, retired out of the Air Force in 2006. I was on the civilian side, not the uniform side. And since then have been heavily involved with NASA in some of their promotion of their work in aeronautics and dissemination of what they have done in promoting aeronautics and aeronautical research. My background is intrinsically tied up with the academic world. I've taught at the university level for the University of Maryland, Chapman College, have lectured and continue to lecture widely. I'm on the board of the Royal Air Force College at Cranwell, and I'm looking forward very much to working with you all. I think we face some very serious challenges, very time-critical challenges, as has been mentioned, but I think with that comes a tremendous opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Frank?
My name is Frank Martin. I am originally a transplant from Tennessee. Moved to Gainesville, Florida back in the 70s. Married a Floridian, was a Florida Gator. My daughter is a Panther. She went to Florida International University. My background is transportation. Having now lived in, I guess, 4 cities within the state of Florida, Miami, Gainesville, Tallahassee, and now the Orlando area, more specifically Clermont. I work for a global engineering firm, and I've been involved in transportation issues, literally coast to coast within North America, helping cities and counties plan, design, and implement public transit and rail systems. In 2006, I had the pleasure of going on the Board of Governors and spent 6 years on the Board of Governors for the system. And during that period of time, I guess my excuse me, very second meeting, I was asked to make a decision on the 2 medical schools that was coming up for a vote as a part of the agenda for that particular meeting. Having literally, I guess, 2 months to understand and get my arms around that issue, I spent about 4 years in Birmingham, Alabama, so I saw the emergence of the University of Alabama at Birmingham system and how their medical program and the ancillary facilities and research centers that were developed as a part of that system. So I saw what I thought a medical entity could do and the economic impact that it could have within the region. So that was a very, first, baptismal fire, if you will, jumping right in and ask, okay, commit, yes or no. I think during the last 3 years serving under Dean Colson and Maury, we were able to recraft the strategic plan, produce an accountability report, and also kind of refashion the whole work plan, university work plan activity for the university system. So I came into it with no experience at all, Scott, in terms of higher ed, but after 6 years, I think I have a little bit of knowledge, and dealing with some very, very tough issues dealing with the system. I'm very excited about this opportunity. I serve on a number of transportation-related boards, and just in the past several months, I've been participating in a workforce development committee, and actually went out to Fargo, North Dakota about 6 weeks ago to talk to the university conference. And the goal was to try to see what we could do in the transportation industry, because in 3 to 5 years, we will have a number of engineers and technicians retiring. We don't really have in the United States any significant training programs to prepare the next generation of engineers. So how do we bridge that gap? We have an intranet inside the company, and when my appointment was announced, it was shared throughout our network within North America. And immediately I got an email from a gentleman in Fort Myers that's been in the university system over a series of years, and he related a similar story in terms of utilities, the utility industry. The fact that in the next 5 to 7 years, you will have a number of utility engineers retiring, and he says, Frank, we need to see what we can do to try to craft an educational system so we can train utility experts. He said, I'm willing to help. So I think that we're embarking on a tremendous opportunity, starting with a clean slate. And I'm very excited to be a part of that. And obviously, I think from the group that has been assembled that we're up for the challenge, or else we would not be here. And I'm willing to do whatever necessary to work with you to make sure that happens. So it's good to be aboard.
Thank you, Frank. Rob, good morning.
Good morning. Well, I'm the money guy in the group. My career has all been in the capital markets. I graduated from Clearwater High School in the University of Florida. I promptly married my wife and moved her to New York City in the 70s, which led me to Washington, D.C. and Chicago, Baltimore and Dallas. I moved from investing other people's money through institutions to working in an investment bank, and then ultimately into the private equity business, where I still play. I'm associated with a number of groups, private equity groups in New York, and through that, transitioned into investing into companies. I've invested in about 50 companies in the United States. I've invested in 20-some countries overseas. I've taken companies public in 7 countries, most recent in Brazil. I know what the world looks like I know what our competition looks like and where the emerging markets are going to take us in the long run if we don't respond. My wife explained to me that there are airports and that Florida has beautiful airports, and so she described how I could use them and we could move back to Florida, so we moved back, which was always our plan in the late 90s. I'm still active in the capital markets and formation of companies. I've been president of 12, 2 public companies. I've been on the boards of 12 public and private companies. I've successfully fired myself as president of those companies 8 times. Moving on to finding people that really could grow it beyond the startup phase. I've started up companies, I've repositioned them, I've merged them. I've dealt with a very, very large, financial enterprises. In 2008, General McCollum, who was Attorney General at the time, asked me to do some state service, which at the time involved going on the board, the Investment Advisory Council, to the State Board of Administration, which manages the Florida retirement system and the Hurricane Cat Fund, and I've been chairman of that committee for the last several years, moving the investment side of our state pension fund into a position that can deal with some very difficult liabilities. Been presenting on behalf of the IAC in establishing investment policy strategy, to our 3 statewide elected officials for the last several years. So I'm very familiar with the process of the sunshine, et cetera. I'm also on the board of directors of FICO, which is the University of Florida Investment Corporation, managing the University of Florida's endowment. Been very active at the University of Florida over the last 10 to 12 years. I've had a number of different positions in the foundation and chairman of the current finance committee of the University of Florida Foundation. My family and I have been very active in higher education. We've made a number of different financial commitments here in the state, to UF, of course, to UCF, the University of Miami, which is a tough thing for a Gator to do. My mother's a graduate of the University of South Florida. I feel like this is home. And to your point, Maury, I'm really pretty much driven by a family that's basically said, look, you have been given so much, personally, friendships, money, and I have that sense of fear that when we meet our maker, he's going to say, what'd you do with it? And this is what you do with it. You contribute.
Thank you. Kevin.
Well, I'm clearly the anomaly in the group. I wonder why I'm here myself when I hear the backgrounds of these wonderful people. I am the executive vice president of a company called Bright House Networks, which is a communications company that serves a large part of Central Florida, so some of you may be familiar with that. I have 3 children. My oldest graduated from the University of Southern Maine. She was more or less a commuter, so she didn't fully matriculate. Took her about 7 or 8 years as a part-time student to slug through her education. My son is a graduate of the University of Colorado with a degree in economics. My daughter graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in biology and recently graduated with a master's degree in molecular biology from the University of Southern Florida. And my son, who relocated to Florida, also received his MBA from University of South Florida. Myself, I grew up in Colorado. I went to the University of Northern Colorado with a degree in economics. I went to the University of Rhode Island, received a graduate degree in economics. I went to Rhode Island because they were the only school that offered me financial assistance, a graduate assistant program. I more or less tripped into an opportunity to teach in a small college in New England called Nassau College, which is troubled financially at the time I was there and is no longer in existence. It's been absorbed by the University of Southern Maine. Spent 4 years in that experience. I loved every minute of it. I did get an interesting perspective of how difficult it was in that environment to separate the past and develop plans for the future for survival. So I don't think my interest in education's ever waned since that experience. I then got into the investment banking business and spent 7 years with a small company in Denver, Colorado that was involved in municipal financing, generally a municipal bond house called Betcher and Company. I was vice president of that company. Then I tripped again into developing one of the nation's first competitive cable television companies, where a number of us were dissatisfied with the service of the cable company in Colorado Springs, and we decided to build our own, compete with a company called Time Warner Communications. And we competed very effectively, and it was a very successful operation, but ultimately we sold to Time Warner. I went to work for Time Warner and stayed with them until Bright House and Time Warner did this very complicated business deal in 2003, and I moved with the Bright House Networks folks. I think it's hard for me to state eloquently why I'm most interested in this school, other than I think it goes back to my roots all the way through my particular education, my particular opportunities, my anxiety about being a college student, a graduate student, and what's going to happen to me in the workplace, how am I prepared to interact with society, and then having some minimal interaction in the academic environment, seeing where opportunities may present themselves and seeing some of the challenges of moving into a new and dynamic future, as opposed to, for a better word, stuck with the legacy of the past, and how to create those kinds of balances. But I couldn't be more excited about being here and having an opportunity to do something fresh and interesting again. I had that opportunity in cable television. It was very rewarding, and this is now taking the opportunity in the public sector and do something for others rather than for myself. So that's a little bit about
Kevin,
that.
I mentioned it when I met Governor and I met with you that I go to different cities in our Florida operations, and everywhere I turn, a Bright House goes out of its way to help the community in many cities. So you guys do an unbelievable job, serving the communities, and so thank you so much. I'm going to turn over, thank you, Mrs. Chairman, turn over to our Chancellor to give you an overview of the university system. I'm going to surprise him and say, Mr. Chancellor, can you just, in a couple of minutes, tell us about yourself? And
No. I can tell you about myself, just not in a couple of moments. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I, first of all, want to acknowledge, as he exits, Dean Colson, our chairman, for two reasons. One, as Maury mentioned, he has provided great leadership for a great board of governors during his time with us. And second, to disabuse anyone of the notion publicly that he is leaving because the microphone ended up with me at the same time. He didn't mention technically where he was going. He mentioned Gainesville, he mentioned the University of Florida, but the Board of Governors is going to be involved in the search for the replacement of President Manchin. And so both Governor Colson and Governor Ava Parker out of Jacksonville will be involved in that search process, along with a good number of and high-quality folks in that search for a very important transition. And they have their first meeting in Gainesville this morning. So that's where you're headed, and I thought you might be interested in knowing that. Just very quickly, I am celebrating, I think, 35 years in public service in the state of Florida. I started as a fifth grade teacher in Martin County, Florida, Stewart, in southeast Florida. I went to the University of Cincinnati, which is where I grew up, and my wife and I moved to Stewart, Florida. Cincinnati is one of the greatest cities in the country, and if they moved it closer to the equator, I might still live in it. I decided early on that I was a warm weather guy, and we relocated to Stewart, Florida. I had family there and used to visit during spring break, etc. Thought it was paradise, and it continues to be. Florida's an amazing state. I am also a partial product of the state university system. Even though I received my baccalaureate degree in education at the University of Cincinnati, I worked on and ultimately achieved a master's degree in education leadership at Florida Atlantic University while I was teaching in Martin County just up the road. And that degree helped me go on to additional career opportunities in education, from dean of students to assistant principal to school principal. I was the superintendent of schools for the Martin County school system for 6 years before becoming the state's commissioner of education, which began my first stint in Tallahassee, which ended up lasting 10 years as not only commissioner of education, but as lieutenant governor for Jeb Bush at the time, serving one full term, and then into the second term had the remarkable experience and opportunity of going back to that part of the state and assuming the presidency of Florida Atlantic University. Remarkable in that if you would have told me when I was a student there that ultimately I would come back as the president of the university, I think the reaction would have been significant, not only by me, but by the university. So it was a remarkable opportunity, and I cherished the time that I spent there. And I had actually, Norman just signed a new contract to stay there. Norman was on the board when the university made the dubious choice of hiring me as president, its fifth president. And suddenly the job of chancellor came open. And it was not a job I was interested in, not because of the job itself. I was busy at Florida Atlantic University. Long story short, almost 3 years later, here I am. And I will tell you this, to segue, I left Florida Atlantic, well, I asked for the privilege of coming to Tallahassee as the chancellor of the state university system, in part because I had been university president, and in part because I realized that while individual institutions in our system were doing great things, that we had fallen into a pattern, we'll talk about this a little more in the presentations, over time where we had lost our edge as a system of higher education in the state of Florida. I'm going to bore some of my colleagues because they've heard me use this analogy prior, but I'm going to do it again because I feel it's important. And it really tells the story of why I did come and ask for the privilege of becoming the chancellor of the state university system. If you know anything about college athletics, you know college athletics are divided into conferences for athletic purposes. And there are a wide variety of conferences at every division level across the country. While I was president of FAU, I had the pleasure of serving as a member of the board of directors of the NCAA, and got to know intimately what each conference looked like, how they operated, what made some seem to be more notable than others. But what I found as I looked at that system is the fact that, and I use the SEC just for purposes of example here, the Southeastern Conference, but also it's known to be one of the premier conferences in the country, is that when I would attend the national meetings, people affiliated with the Southeastern Conference schools would walk into those national meetings, and they brought with them a certain swagger that I believed over time was born of two things. One, their belief that they came from a great institution of higher education that boasted an outstanding athletic program. But two, they believed that they were a member school of a conference that was, as far as they were concerned, the best athletic conference in the United States. Put those two things together, it gave them that swagger. It wasn't one or the other. I am convinced it was both of those things. Now, people in the ACC and some of the others might argue who is the best conference. That's not the point. The point is people want to be a member of a conference not only for what they can bring to the conference, but for what the conference can do for them as an institution. That's the importance of it. The opportunity to organize around a conference, to be a member of a conference, the ability of those conference schools to plan together, envision together, all with the idea of creating something extraordinary for the individual institutions and for the conference of which they are a part. The analogy, I'm sure, breaks down somewhere, but I feel the same way about our state university system. It is important that we have 11 and now 12 individual institutions working toward extraordinary excellence every day. But it's just as important that those institutions work collaboratively to create the strongest system of public universities in the United States. And if you look around the country, you will note, not ironically, that most of the revered institutions of higher education in the country are also part of great recognized systems in our country. That's not a coincidence. Great systems boast great individual institutions of higher education, and great institutions of higher education are part of great systems. And over the last 10 years or so, I believe Florida has lost its edge in creating a systemic approach to higher education. That is not to say the institutions, again, aren't doing great work. But at the end of the day, what people like me, people like these seated at this table, and so many others out there on boards of trustees and presidents and others are trying to do is reknit our system of state universities in Florida, so that they're not only in search of a great individual reputation for their school and ultimately great opportunities for their graduates, but that they can boast that they are a part of a well-knit system of state universities. And that obviously translates to a comment that I'm about to make regarding Florida in general. Florida has made its name, and appropriately so, for so long, on the back of agriculture, on the back of tourism, and on the back of sheer growth and all that goes along with it. Those are three formidable underpinnings of an economy of the fourth largest, soon to be third largest state in the country. And they continue to serve us very well in their own ways. Long live agriculture. Tourism is huge and dynamic, and growth is not a coincidence. People come here because Florida is such an amazing place to want to be and to grow, or to retire, or to just be a part of. But at the end of the day, as we now come into the 21st century, it is important that we look at our future and recognize that the fourth leg of the stool is the one that we are really beginning to create, and that is a knowledge-based economy. It doesn't work in contrast to the others. Quite the contrary. I think it works in perfect harmony with the others. By the way, footnote here, if you want an example of an industry that has learned how to harness the power of science and technology, check agriculture. Go back and look at a map of the United States 50 years ago and see how much property was dedicated to agriculture, and look at that same map today and scratch your head and wonder, how are we feeding 300 million people and more with so much less property dedicated to agriculture? And the people in agriculture will tell you, because we're not doing it the same way we did it 50 years ago and 100 years ago, because we were smart enough in the world of agriculture to master the art of infusion of science and technology into what we now utilize to feed Americans and people all over the world. It's a great illustration of an old industry doing things in a very new way, and it translates beautifully to your charge, which is to ultimately turn out students who can do new things in a very different way. And even those who want more engineers understand, because they're smart people, even engineering is being done very differently now. Science is being done differently now. All of the STEM areas don't waddle, quack, and fly the way they used to. So as we look at what we're about to embark upon, and in terms have been used like blank palette, clean slate, it is true. This is unprecedented, absolutely unprecedented. There are some examples you can use that are similar in terms of startup institutions in our public university system, but none in the history of our system are exactly this way. Everything morphed in a way from something else. Everything that was created as a freestanding institution began as something else. Here, the unbelievable and dynamic charge is creating something from literally nothing. And while many look at that as an enormous challenge, many of us around this table look at the endless possibilities that go along with that. The ability to create something that's never been created before, to take the charge of the chairman here and do it any way we believe it ought to be done and create something that's never been created before. Yes, we're mindful of those things that tether us, accreditation and laws and rules and regulations, but at the end of the day, your big charge is to test every basic assumption in the creation of something that's never been done before. As I look around this table and have looked at each of you on paper and then have gotten to know each of you in a brief period of time, there's not a corporation in the state of Florida that boasts a board as good as this one. Most corporate boards understand very quickly you want diversity on a board, and I just don't mean diversity of gender and race. I mean the diversity of portfolio that each brings to the table. Just by way of quick introduction, we've demonstrated the amazing and broad portfolios that each of you bring to this charge and the diversity of background that makes this an amazing opportunity for the Florida Polytech and its future. We've also allowed a few positions to remain. We've allowed one slot to be held for the Board of Governors for future appointment, and the Governor has held 2 of his 6 appointments in check. Because that gives us an opportunity to look at what's been pulled together, and then, as my chairman will tell you, be able to go in and fill those additional 3 spots with yet more diversity and more opportunity that will marry with what we've brought together here with those of you around this table. So throughout today's exercise, we're not only going to hear more about the Florida Polytech, the challenges that we face, because it is we. It is just not you as a board. Believe me, this board has no intention, nor do I or my staff, of wishing you well and sending you on your way. Because this is unprecedented, it is going to take an unprecedented collaboration in order not only to get it done, but get it done right. As Mother used to say, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Get it right. And as Maury mentioned to you earlier, so much of what's going to happen next year, the year after that, and 10 years down the road and further will be determined based on the initial decisions made by this board and the leadership that this board will bring together to create this unprecedented and wonderful opportunity. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the chance just to say welcome to each and every one of you, and we look forward to working with you. I believe all of you have my cell phone now. Some of you have already used it. I offer it to you. Please call me anytime, and I know I speak the same for the members of the Board of Governors who are here today. We're all in this together. We look forward to being great partners in this effort.
Thank you, Chancellor. Really appreciate it. This is the time for me to come off the script. Monica writes my script. She tries to keep me online. I mean, and she has really a hard time with that. And so what I like to do is to just take a moment and get our staff introduce themselves, because they are the backbone of our organization. They're the one day in, day out. And I honestly will tell you that many times I have talked to Chancellor at nights, during the weekends, on and on and on. And that goes down to all of our staff. I've talked to our staff, I'll tell you something very interesting. We, in Florida, we try to save all we can. Now, so what happened is, if you're working in a government office, I think after a certain time, the air conditioning go off. They turn it off. And so, because they assume, 6 o'clock, they assume that the state employees, that they're all gone by 6 o'clock. Well, I have news for you. Not the Board of Governors. I have many times have talked to Vicky, Monica, Randy, way past 6 o'clock, and they sit in their office, in a warm office, and do their job. And they need to be commendable. So with that, just real quick, I'm going to start with our Chancellor's Chief of Staff, Randy. Can you just introduce yourself?
I didn't know I quite literally worked in a sweatshop, but some days I can believe that, at least after 6 on the weekends. Randy Goen, I'm the Chief of Staff of the Board of Governors. I've talked to most of you. I've been with the board office for 3 years since Chancellor Brogan came on board. Prior to that, I was at Florida Atlantic University. So good to see you all.
Thank you. Let's just go down. Diane?
Hello, everyone. I'm Diane McCain. I'm the Director of External Relations, which means I do everything that anybody needs doing. So I'd be happy to help you in any way. I had the honor of working for Chancellor Brogan when he was a commissioner, and I've been with the legislature and the federal government, and just very pleased to be part of the state university system for, I guess, almost 6 years now.
Boss, I'm in Monoka.
I'm Minoka Ventures. I'm the corporate secretary, and I am Maury's boss, or at least that's what he tells everybody. I'm staff to the Trustee Nominating and Development Committee, and so he is the chair of that committee. I also work with the entire board with the board meetings and getting those set up. So.
And one thing he misses here is that Monoka is an attorney, right?
Yes.
And she's also getting her PhD at the,
Florida State.
Florida State. So while he's not, okay, let's just go here, Jan.
I'm Jan Ignash. I'm the Chief Academic Officer. I've been here since April. Before that, I was the Deputy Director for Policy Planning and Research with the Washington State Higher Education Coordinating Board. But lest you think that Florida is not my home, I do need to tell you, I spent 10 years at the University of South Florida as program chair for their higher ed doctoral program. I was tenured in that program, and some of the beauties of that is yesterday I was at a meeting where one of my own doctoral students was there as representing her institution, one of the state colleges. So Florida is my home. I am so glad to be back and just delighted to work with you on putting this new institution together.
Tim?
Thank you. I'm Tim Jones. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the board. I've been with the board in one capacity or another since about 1999 when it was the Board of Regents, and they went away, then the Board of Governors. So we're here to assist in any way possible. We have a variety of experts throughout the state and in the office, so anything you all need, you just feel free to call.
Vicki?
Thank you, Governor Hussaini. I'm Vicki Shirley. I'm the board's general counsel. I've been in this role since 2006. Prior to that, I was in private practice in Tallahassee with the Huey Gilday Law Firm, where I did primarily insurance defense and copyright and medical malpractice. For the board, I handle all matters legal. I am the entire legal staff. I have no other attorneys. I have no associates. I have no paralegals. It is me. You will come to find quickly that we are a very small but efficient staff. And we do work hard. Nights, weekends, we are always available. Vacations, not sure what that is. But we do work very hard, and we're here to help you make this transition because I think you are going to need a lot of legal advice. I'm glad you have Mr. Wilson on your board. He's got a lot of experience and a lot of experience with the Polk State and understands how boards of trustees work. So I look forward to working with you all.
Great. So what we do at this point is we're going to move from trustee appointment committee to the Committee on Florida Polytechnic University, and thus bring up introduction of our senior member of the board, and which is my friend Norman Tripp and Dick Beard. You know, they all have other jobs, but I mean other jobs on the board of governors, and the select committee was set up, and so 3 of us manage the select committee on Polytechnic, and that's 3 of us been working on trying to work the creation, working with this board and all that. So I'm going to go to Dick. Would you introduce yourself, Dick?
Thank you, Maury. I'm Dick Beard. I moved to Florida in 1972 in the private real estate development field. And as a matter of fact, Rob Riddell and I worked for the same company at one point, I think. And I was born and raised in Atlanta and went to Georgia Tech. And I understand that Polytech and Georgia Tech may be an inspirational kind of goal for Polytech, and that's one reason when when we had the vote on Polytech, that I felt pretty comfortable voting yes for that after several difficult negotiations, if I remember correctly. But I understand, since I graduated from Tech, and I think it made a difference in my life, that technical background helped me get where I eventually got. Educational-wise, after Tech, I was in the development business for 30 years, and then got a little bit involved in politics, and was appointed to the Board of Regents under Jeb Bush's tutelage for about 6 months, and then he decided not to have a Board of Regents and go to a Board of Governors, and was the initial chairman for the University of South Florida Board that was created after that. So I've been involved in new boards and can maybe help in some ways as to how you guys tackle this very, very difficult job that starting from nothing, getting to something is. And after my stint as on the Board of Trustees at USF, I was appointed to this board and have enjoyed it and been working on it for the last 3 years or so. My kind of initial thought is that you guys need to come to grips with a plan and be have a clear vision of where you want to go, and have a good timeline, and be pragmatic about all that stuff. You know that, I know that, and I think if you do and get to that stage early on, that you'll eliminate a lot of confusion and a lot of possibilities of issues that may cause problems in the future. So I'm here to help and support, and we want it to be extremely successful. I'd love to see in 20 years another Georgia Tech right down the street from where I live in Tampa.
Thank you, Dick. Governor Tripp.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. One of the great things of serving on this board is you get to meet people that totally overwhelm you in a period of time, and that is this man right here. Incredible in terms of his time, of his intelligence, his political skills, and one of the best people to have dinner with you ever met. Thank you. I've been involved in community events for a long time. I came to the University of Miami. I was going to be a singer. My mother had taken in laundry and washing to give me singing lessons, and I thought that was going to send me off. I ended up at the University of Miami in radio and television school, ended up with a degree in economics and a minor in television, went up to Cleveland where I had met my wife in Miami, went up there and ended up going to law school at night and working during the day. I can't say I recommend that for everybody, but graduating from law school, I decided I needed to get back to Florida, so I took a job in Fort Lauderdale rather than Cleveland, and started, after about a year, my own law firm, which is now called Tripp Scott. And one of the proudest things, a year or so ago, Florida Trend named us as one of the top law firms to work for in the state of Florida. That tells you how much we think about our people. During that time, I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman that wanted to hire me to help him in various matters. That ended up being my partner, and we founded Alamo Rent-A-Car. That was a hell of a ride, and during that period of time, I served as general counsel, and it helped the law firm grow as well as the company, and then we sold the company in '96 to Wayne Huizinga, who bought it for AutoNation. On the education side, I've always been involved in politics. the Scott part of Trip Scott is former Senator Jim Scott, who was President of the Senate and had 23 years in the Florida Senate. So understood what was going on there. He got me to be involved a number of years ago, and I served what at the time was the State Board of Community Colleges. And I served under Martinez, and then I served again under Governor Bush, and had various roles, was chairman, vice chairman, etc. Then, when the trustee system came in place, I was appointed trustee of FAU, and served on that board as vice chair and chair, and had the honor to try and chase Frank around. And if you've ever tried to walk through the Capitol with Frank, he knows everybody. And if you've got a meeting in 5 minutes, you can be sure you'll be there in 20. Because Frank can't get through the hallway without a hug, a kiss, a handshake, whatever. After that, I was appointed to this board, and I've served on it, I think 4 years, going on 5 years. And I ended up in the Polytech probably because I made the initial motion to have Polytech be instituted through the auspices of USF. And so we were working diligently to make that happen when all of a sudden one day we found out it was going to be a different way. It wasn't going to be a transition that way. It was going to be immediately a new university with a new board of trustees. And so our role, I think, will be diminished, I hope, Maury.
Not yet. We still have to oversee the teach out of. You try though.
Yeah. I said to Dick, I said, you know, I wanted to meet those people today who would put their hand up in the air and say, "I'll do this," you know. But it is a terrific opportunity. I think one thing that makes it very, very unusual is it is not only the fact that we have you, but you have the support because of how this university starts of the House and Senator Gates, who's now the president of the Senate, and the governor, who put his name on the line. And so I think you're not going to be pushing, you know, against the wall. I think they will be with you every step of the way, wanting you to be successful because they've already stepped forward with it. So good luck. We're here to support you, and we surely will.
Thank you, Governor Tripp. At this time, I'm going to turn back to the Chancellor to discuss the Polytechnic University different topics.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Folks, at the risk of boring you, and I hope I don't, we thought it would be important to give you two quick history lessons. One, a history lesson of our state university system, which has changed fairly significantly over recent years. And then I'm going to dovetail into a quick history lesson on the Polytech, because as we say, while the suggestion is that we're painting on a blank palette, some of that has to be grounded in reality that this is not a new issue. As Norman just mentioned, this one's been around for a long time in some shape or form. So we thought it would be helpful just to give you a quick history lesson on the Polytech. Okay? So I will try to do this as quickly as I can. Please feel free to stop me anywhere if you have questions. I'll try to answer them. And if I can't, we certainly have a wealth of historical experience around this table with people who can. The history of the university system is quite interesting. It started a long time ago, as you can see, back in the the early 1900s as the State Board of Control. It was statutorily authorized, and it was to manage the early university system. You can imagine what the university system looked like in 1905. It was fairly small in those days. And then, long after the 1905 beginning, came the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents lasted from 1965 to 2001. They were the only managing board in our public universities at the time, and a footnote here, the only education delivery system of a public nature that did not have local boards at the time. That's an important note there. The school systems, K through 12, now pre-K through 12, all had boards that were elected in the 67 school districts, and are, at the time, community colleges each had local boards appointed by the governor. But the state university system had one oversight board, and that was the Board of Regents, made up of gubernatorial appointments, and then those of us, I served on the Board of Regents because I had the title as Commissioner of Education, those of us who had a particular title that were required statutorily to serve. All of this, by the way, done in statute. Well, that board lasted until 2001, and was mentioned by Governor Beard a moment ago. A change of significance was made in 2001, and that was to eliminate the then Board of Regents, a statutorily created body, and create statutorily the Florida Board of Education. You see in quotes there, the Super Board, a board that was meant to oversee all things K through 12, state college, well, again at the time, community colleges, and state universities. The idea being to create a seamless system by putting one oversight board in charge of all of that. Well, it didn't last long. The change came. At the time, there were still local boards. Thank you, Dick, for that. There were local boards in place during this period of time. So not only was the Super Board created, but the first in the history of the state, local boards of trustees for the universities were also created at that time. The idea was to have a Super Board to handle major organizational issues, but also to make sure that all of the local institutions were at the same time overseen by local boards, whether it was school boards, the boards of the community colleges at the time, or the now universities with their own local boards. I was lieutenant governor at the time, and I was heavily involved actually in the creation of those local boards. The governor, I remember, walked into my office one day and said, "Have I got something for you to do?" And we spent the next months literally creating a boiler room to go out and try to tap some of the best and brightest folks in the state of Florida to be the charter members of those boards of trustees. 11 members appointed, and then 3 additional members that came from the university, a student and a faculty member coming from the faculty senate. I said 3, 2 others, so 13 members all total. Well, the next transition took place when some folks decided that the old system modified would be a better system. The idea was to put something on the ballot and create a constitutionally created body, which would be for strictly the oversight of the state university system, to continue and codify in that constitutional language the individual boards of trustees for the universities. That constitutional initiative did pass in 2003, and thus was created then by title in Constitution for the first time, not just statute, the Board of Governors, a 17-member body, all appointed by the governor with 3 exceptions. One, again, was a faculty representative that was elected by each of the faculty senates of the institutions as the president of their own body, ultimately elected collectively to become the Board of Governors representative, and the student, done in the same way. The student body presidents collectively would elect one of those student body presidents to sit as the student representative on the Board of Governors. The third titled member, not appointed, is the Commissioner of Education, which holds a seat on the 17-member Board of Governors. The idea there was obvious, to maintain a connectivity between the K through 12 system, what are now state colleges and colleges, and the state university system. Vicki is going to go into, as will others, more of the specific charge laid out in that constitutional initiative for the Board of Governors, but you can see the translation there. Some of the work that the board has been doing, especially over the last few years, and I need to mention this because I mentioned in my opening remarks the fact that we had loosened our knit on the issue of system, and largely that was the early belief by the Board of Governors that virtually all authority, for the most part, should be vested down, devolved down to the local boards of trustees and the local institutions. And that was done very early on after the genesis of the Board of Governors. Their first meeting was essentially dedicated to officially devolving down to the local institutions huge amounts of authority and autonomy away from the centralized Board of Governors that had just been created in Constitution. That began a period unprecedented in the state, quite literally, of massive local control. Local control is a great thing, and those local boards are wonderful. I think 2 of the 3 people seated here were on local boards before they came to the Board of Governors. But I think they would also agree that during that time, we put most of our eggs in the basket of local control and very few eggs into the basket of system and organizing the system to work as institutions together. That began to change with new appointments to the board, new philosophies coming forth, and a lawsuit that was ultimately filed, first not by the Board of Governors, but by others, Bob Graham and a group of other citizens, challenged the approach originally that the Board of Governors was taking, and believed that the Board of Governors, by constitutional fiat, the will of the people, had been given the authority to manage and oversee and organize the state university system, and that it wasn't up to the Board of Governors, but it also wasn't up to the legislature, in their mind, to continue to hold so much control over the way the system was to move forward in light of the constitutional initiative that was passed. So there was a suit filed originally by a group of citizens challenging the authority of the legislature to maintain that kind of a role of oversight and management, if you will, of the state university system. Ultimately, that suit was enjoined by the Florida Board of Governors. They signed on to that lawsuit and thus began a fascinating period of relationship with the Florida legislature. I was a president at the time, and my only warning that I offered was there are 2 things Mother said you should never do. Question Mother Nature and sue the Florida legislature, and believe you'll win at the end of the day. Even if you win in court, you will probably lose at the end of the day, because they are a huge part of our state university system. It's impossible to consider what we do without recognizing the authority, but also the contributions necessary to operate our system of state universities without the Florida legislature. Well, this period was rather difficult for everyone associated, and went on for a period of time, until which time, and this was just about 3 years ago, that there was a change. I think not only some of the existing people on the board, but new members of the board came together and believed that it was time not only to cool the acrimony, but also to settle the lawsuit, to do that. And begin to really try to forge a relationship with the legislature to determine what would the roles and responsibility of the legislature, the Board of Governors, the local boards of trustees be, and see if we could find a harmonious way to do that. My first legislative session was completely dedicated up here as the new chancellor to working with our members of the Board of Governors, working with our staff and that of the legislature, not only in developing the relationship that would give the Board of Governors the confidence that they could vacate their part of the lawsuit, but also, very importantly, reach what we call a settlement agreement with the legislature, not in the legal sense that you would use to vacate a lawsuit, but more in the philosophical sense, to create a settlement agreement that would say if we did have a relationship, what would be, generally speaking, the role of the Board of Governors, the role of the Boards of Trustees, and the role of the legislature. And we were successful in doing that. That then, very importantly, gave way to a massive rewrite during that session of Florida statute to actually commit to statutory language that which we had created in the settlement agreement, thus further clarifying all of those roles and responsibilities. Ironically, what I found in working with lots of people in the legislature is they were pleased to finally be able to see a Board of Governors that was willing to assume its rightful role and responsibility, and it's an awesome responsibility, in organizing and managing and providing oversight to the second largest state university in the United States without significant intrusion during the legislative process, and the legislature then finding their rightful role in support of funding of the state university system. So that significantly changed not just the relationship, it then changed the role of the Board of Governors, and during the last 3 years the board has been very, very busy working with the local universities, their boards, their presidents, to rewrite many of our regulations. Most people aren't aware of the fact that state agencies have rules under which they operate. We are not considered a state agency because we are created by constitutional fiat, very different. So we actually have regulations, and a major point of emphasis in the creation of that settlement agreement was to acknowledge that by the board, by the legislature, and to rewrite the statutes to afford the board their rightful responsibility to craft those regulations as to how our system of state universities would operate into the future. That was a significant accomplishment. The challenge, of course, with rules or regulations is not to under-regulate nor to over-regulate. I've always said there's a fine line between micromanagement and anarchy. Somewhere in there is an appropriate balance for an overarching governing body to strike. And I can assure you this board has worked very hard, knowing the need for additional regulation, but understanding the importance of striking that balance between regulation and micromanagement. We don't pass a regulation without, and trust me on this one, huge amounts of input from those local universities, their boards, their presidents, and whenever they believe that we are in danger of trampling into the arena of micromanagement in the formulation of a proposed regulation, they let us know about that. And then we try to negotiate to a position of balance. So that's what this board has been up to. At the same time, strongly trying to emphasize the need, and this is something that your board will have to work with in the future, is the issue of accountability. The great thing about accountability is everybody believes in it. What that accountability looks like is typically the consternation point. But at the end of the day, when this Board of Governors, working with the University of South Florida, created the first template for the creation of the Polytech, it was very important to lay out certain metrics that were put into place by the Board of Governors for the original University of South Florida Polytech to pursue, to be chasing excellence. And how would we measure that excellence? At the same time, we've created a system within the state university that is being looked at now on a national basis as a system of accountability that people feel strongly about. I refer to staff as the fact that we now celebrate 3 great books in the state university. One is our annual accountability report, and it is the ability to look at each university and how they are faring on key metric points. The amazing thing about our system is we have now 12 institutions. They all do the same thing and provide baccalaureate degrees, but that's where the similarity ends. Each of the universities is as different as you can possibly imagine. The way they're organized, the populations they serve, the academic programs they provide, they are all different as night and day. Everything from Little New College, which is at 850 students, an honors institution for our system that is in Sarasota, up to and including major comprehensive research institutions recognized nationally for not only undergraduate program, but graduate and research work at the same time. It was important to create an accountability approach that would be broad sweeping enough to capture all of the similarities, but also all of the differences within our universities. We'll talk more about that to come. The metrics that you see there are the ones that we have lit upon. Those are metrics that not only are common to all 12 of the institutions, regardless of how they're organized and what degrees they offer, but are also set up to take into consideration those institutions that are largely predicated upon undergraduate programming, those that are undergraduate and graduate, and those that are undergraduate, graduate, and are considered Research 1 institutions. So that's why you see a fairly significant number of them, but not all of those are assigned to all of the institutions based on the unique mission that each institution brings to bear. Randy, if you could flip back to that slide that had the 3 books on it. Just real quickly, the centerpiece is the system-wide strategic plan. Frank Martin had mentioned that he was one of the architects of that plan. He'll be a great resource to you all to make sure as we develop the strategic plan for Florida Poly that it also jives with the system strategic plan. Here's a great opportunity to make sure that we're not just turning out more degrees, but they also happen to be degrees that will advance the cause of economic development in the state of Florida and work in harmony with degrees that are being produced not only in the state universities, but now in the growing state college system and in the private post-secondary world of the ICUF, the independent colleges and universities. We've got to make sure that what we're offering makes sense, not just for the students, but for the state of Florida, and that strategic plan is going to be a very important document in that regard. On the right is the university work plan. For the past 3 years, we have created and been refining a system of university work plans. Each year, the universities come forward in the June meeting with their work plan template having been filled out. It not only is metric-based, but also narrative-based to talk about what the university has done, what the university is, and what the university would propose to do going forward, and how all of that would be measured. It not only is used to determine the differential tuition rate of each university on an annual basis, it is going to be used this year for the formulation of our legislative budget request, something that the legislature has looked at as well as our, I still call him our new governor, but our governor for some time, to make sure that when the University of Central Florida is asking for money for the following year, that there's a reason for it besides asking for more money, that it ties directly together with their strategic plan, the strategic plan of the Board of Governors, that it's aligned with the metrics to make certain that once spent, we can track the return on investment that those dollars bring to each of our institutions. And that's the kind of legislative budget request we will be putting forward to our Board of Governors for their consideration for this upcoming legislative process. But that work plan has tied together now not only the great things happening at universities and their vision for the future, but also is grounded in those metrics to make certain that we are aligning the needs of the institution with the needs of the state and are able to track all of that forward for efficiency, for effective opportunity of operation, and for a unity that will make sure we're a great system that is contributing to the creation of that knowledge-based economy at the end of the day. That concludes the quick trip down memory lane with the last slide. Randy, do you have it on the work groups that are going on right now? Very quickly, you'll hear lots more about this, not only today but in the future. Right now, we have a number of groups hard at work looking at higher education in Florida. I told you I came out of K through 12, and the one thing I used to tell my colleagues in K through 12 who would regularly say, why don't they understand how important we are and why don't they spend more time talking about us? I used to remark the old remember what you wish for, because it might come true. When people start to pay attention to you, they might not always say the things you were expecting them to say. No different in higher ed nationally right now. Higher ed is under greater scrutiny today, Sandra, that I would suggest it has probably been in 100 years. The move to technology, the move to different approaches to higher ed, no different in the state of Florida. So we've got some groups looking at some very important issues. One is the Board of Governors Task Force on Facilities. As many of you know, this will be near and dear to your facilities' hearts at Florida Poly. We have money budgeted for the construction of the first building and the site work at Florida Poly, but the evolution and growth of that construction will be determined over time on available funds to build new buildings, new classrooms, new laboratories, buy new equipment, and also deferred maintenance to keep up those facilities. Even new ones need to be kept up over time. So we know that we ran into some hardship with what's called PICO, Public Education Capital Outlay Funding, that revenue stream. So we have a group working to come up with recommendations for the legislature on just how we might fund and how we might prioritize capital construction projects in the future of Florida's state university system. The Board of Governors Online University Study. Suffice it to say, online education has not just arrived, it's been around for a long time, but it is growing by leaps and bounds. Good news, Florida State University System is a nationally recognized leader in the world of virtual education, online education. Hundreds of programs and degrees are now available, created by our universities. But what's it all going to look like at the next level? How can we organize it? How can we create new online capabilities for our system? You can't get away from things like facilities when you're talking about online education. We may need to look at facilities differently in the future based on an emerging world of online education. That group will be coming forward with some recommendations by December. The Board of Governors Commission on Florida Higher Education Access and Degree Attainment. I've mentioned today the Florida college system. Obviously, that used to be the community college system. They are now in the business of offering baccalaureate degrees, and we still boast in Florida the finest 2+2 program of its kind in the United States, where a student can begin at a state college, get their Associate of Arts degree, and are guaranteed placement at a state university to translate to a baccalaureate degree. It was created years ago. It was a phenomenon then. It continues to be, as most states still look at it as remarkable. And how do we maintain that? So we've got this group looking at how we might better partner with that system and others to see what our needs are in the future to maintain access, degree production, and does it always mean starting a new university from scratch? Or do we have within our complements right now the wherewithal to be able to, with some reorganization, create additional access points and opportunities by reorganizing what we currently have and how we currently do it? Because as you know, and as you're about to find out with a vengeance, starting an institution from a blank sheet of paper takes years and is very costly. This has a special niche by way of being a Polytech. But the idea of simply starting new general universities from scratch is daunting, both in time and in cost. Are there other ways we can get there by tapping the existing infrastructure in higher ed that we have available today? The Board of Governors Select Committee on the Florida Polytech, you just met those three gentlemen. They are not new to this chore. They were put in place when the University of South Florida was the umbrella organization to create the USF Polytech that by organized approach would then have branched off to become an independent Polytech. Our board felt so strongly about it, they put in place an oversight board that has worked with the initial attempt and now is working, once the bill was signed, with a changed approach to the same end. And they will continue to be this board's representation to you and what you do, never forgetting the importance of all 17 members and their great interest in what we're doing here. But this provides, I think, a funneled approach to their interest, their opportunity, and partnership with Florida Polytech as it moves forward. And the Higher Ed Coordinating Council, lastly, this was a group created 2 years ago in statute that brings together the heads of the 5 different delivery systems in education in the state of Florida. I am one of those as Chancellor of the state system, the Chancellor of the Florida College system, the Commissioner of Education, pre-K through 12, and the heads of each of the private concerns, the ICUF schools, independent colleges and universities, as well as the proprietary for-profit schools. We meet regularly, and I mean regularly, with 2 lay representatives, one given to us by the House, one by the Senate, to represent, if you will, not just business and industry, but the lay community. And the idea is to create a seamless conversation. I've done most of the jobs I just mentioned at one time, it seems, in my life, and the one commonality that I found is that the delivery systems didn't talk to one another. And I know that Governor Bush, when he created the Super Board, what was his intent? His intent was to try to forge a seamless system of educational delivery systems that would literally talk together, plan together, articulate together. And that's what the Higher Ed Coordinating Council is meant to do, is bring together these delivery systems so that we can go back to those that we work with and for to try to continue the dialogue in a seamless fashion. And those groups are all meeting and will continue to meet. Very quickly, a quick trip down memory lane relative to the Polytech. It goes all the way back to 1982 in many ways. In 1982, there was a joint campus for the USF and Polk Community College created under the aegis of SAME. The idea was to try to bring more higher education opportunities to the people who live not just in Lakeland and Polk County, but that part of the state of Florida, recognizing at the time they were far from Tampa and far from Orlando. And those still formulative enterprises, knowing that those 2 institutions actually started in the 60s. Higher ed is very old in our state in many ways, but it is a baby in many other ways. In 1988, the University of South Florida Lakeland Center opened. Again, the idea to expand baccalaureate degree opportunities, graduate degree opportunities in the Lakeland-Polk County area. 83, the center was reclassified as an official branch campus of the University of South Florida by the then Board of Regents, providing it an additional stature, additional resources so that it could continue to grow its opportunities there for the people of that part of the state. In 2004, the Williams Company, we still do business with today, do we not, Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yes.
The Williams Company was gracious enough to donate a significant parcel of property adjacent to I-4 for a new campus of this enterprise, and in 2008, the University of South Florida Lakeland renamed that enterprise USF Polytech. The idea was not just to expand a traditional branch campus, but over time to move toward a focus on Polytechnic work, which traditionally focuses on STEM education-related courses and degrees. In 2009, lower-level courses were approved by USF Board of Trustees and the Florida Board of Governors for that campus, because at that time they only offered upper division programming. By the way, footnote here, that is something we are going to have to wrestle with. Does the Florida Polytech start with all 4 levels? Do we start upper division only? Do we start lower division only? And those conversations, of course, get to be very important when you're talking about how we're funded, how we're organized, accreditation issues, of course, Sandra and others. But that will have to be one of the first discussions that we have, is how we start the Polytech and what levels of education we begin with when we do that. In 2010, SACS, the SACS application, that is, by the way, and I'm always going to remember not to talk down to people, but I never know where people come in. SACS is one of our acronyms. Oh, you will find so many in the world of government and higher education. SACS is the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. This is the regional representation regarding national accreditation that works with colleges and schools all over the southeastern United States. SACS accreditation is a very important and many believe critical element in what the Florida Polytech is going to have to achieve. I bring you regrets today from Belle Whelan, who is the president of SACS, who very much wanted to be here. ultimately to talk about accreditation with you. This is the last day of their annual summer retreat for all those involved in SACS, but she has committed herself to come, if we can coordinate it, to not only a quick meeting of the board, but the first meeting of the board, if the schedules will allow her to personally come down here and talk about one of the major issues that you all will be wrestling with in the near and long term, and that is the issue of accreditation. The Board of Governors in 2011 then took up the cause of creating a path for independence based on achievement of specific benchmarks. I talked about that earlier. Many of us will always remember the meeting at Florida Atlantic University of the Board of Governors where we met into the night to look at a proposal as to how we could take the then embryonic University of South Florida Polytech and ultimately create a clear pathway not only for USF, but ultimately the independence of the Polytech as a freestanding institution. And with that, I think, Governor Tripp, you made the motion that was ultimately discussed and ultimately approved to accept that pathway, the metrics that I spoke of earlier that would be assigned to that pathway, that would have seen under that model first accreditation achieved as a campus of the University of South Florida, and then a translation to the seeking of independent status of accreditation. And of course, in 2012, the legislation was passed and ultimately signed into law that changed that trajectory. As Governor Hussaini mentioned, no longer would we be trying to secure accreditation for the institution as a branch, but the new language that we'll go over in just a minute, it really is critical that you know exactly what the law charges you with, and all of us with. The new law took the University of South Florida, separated it immediately upon signature of the governor from Florida Polytech, the newly created name given it in statute, and thus changed dramatically the trajectory and the approach that was originally created for it. I have to tell you, talk about a pragmatic group, my board, almost to the person, continued to say while the bill was going through the legislative process, we'll deal with whatever comes out of the pipe. We have selected a pathway. If that's what we end up with, we will make that pathway work. If that pathway changes, we will make the new model work. And they have been good to that ever since and continue to be. But now we're working with Senate Bill 1994 that was signed into law. That will become in many ways your pathway to success for the Polytech and ours. And as we acquaint you with that law, that will give you a much clearer, I think, identification as to what all of us have to accomplish and in what period of time it needs to be accomplished. So with that, I will stop both history lessons and see, Mr. Chair, if it's acceptable to you, if there are any questions about either the system or the Polytech approach.
I just wanted to probably be answering it later, but what kinds of funds we have for the operating budget, because of course we're going to have expenses before we have any student income coming in.
You actually will be hearing about, that's why one of the reasons Tim is here. Tim has been associated with the budgeting of the state university system since we dealt in dinars. He knows all about the budgets of the system. Trust me, he's been around a long time. He will be able to give you, before we're finished, Dr. Featherman, a very clear picture of what that budget looks like, recurring and non-recurring revenue. We'll talk about the facilities budget and the facilities project to give you an idea of what you have and probably more importantly what you're going to have going forward in that regard. Does that help?
I thought you would have the answer.
And I don't have them all, believe me. I am not the Yoda of the state university system.
So with that said, I think it's time for us to take a break. We'll come back in 10 minutes.
Great.
Take a 10 minutes break, and then we'll be back.